So this topic is getting into some of the more fun, kind of socially interesting topics you can tell your friends about. And I usually hesitate to put in any kind of artificial plants or anything that's all too connected to people, but I couldn't help myself with this one. The topic today is carnivorous plants. And of course, this is a fanciful alien carnivorous plant from the movie and musical Little Shop of Horrors. And I guess maybe as much as anything, this is a nice illustration of people's interest in carnivorous plants. We're always a little bit kind of curious. What if a plant could eat us? And here's a rather extreme example. So in these examples, this is pretty common from movies. This idea of a rather fast moving plant that has aggressive carnivore tendencies kind of creep up on you and rapidly devour you. We'll see some cases where the threat is real, but the threat is more for a much smaller animal. So usually not so extreme as what's shown here, and you don't really have any carnivorous plants to watch out for. So just a little introduction to the topic of carnivorous plants. When we say carnivorous, of course, the carne part of that is the eating of meat, so the flesh of animals. So these are a rare class of plants that actually eat animals. So they get nutrients from animals. And it's more than just that. Some animals give nutrients to plants kind of accidentally. So animal waste or an incidental dead animal provides nutrients that plants in the area can use. Carnivorous plants have the specific part of their definition is really having the ability to draw in animals, effectively kill them, and take their nutrients. So a lot more involved than just an incidental nutrient uptake of animal nutrients. So those are the big ones we'll talk about. To be carnivorous involves attracting animals, kind of enriching your ability to have animals near you that you can eat, actually capturing them. We'll see some different mechanisms that plants use to capture animals. And carnivorous plants also, by definition, they need a way to directly uptake those nutrients of the animals that they've captured. So this second question here, why would plants become carnivorous? And this habitat kind of shows one of the examples. There's a video I can share with you that talks about this particular habitat. This is a habitat on top of a stone plateau in northern South America, where, as you can see, water is pretty abundant. This is kind of a tropical rainforest habitat, but the soil there isn't really much soil to speak of. So these plants are growing really in pools on top of a rock, and plant nutrients can come from decomposing material, soil rocks that have been weathered over some time. But these are like bare rock surfaces, and there's not much in the way of nutrients. And that tends to be the tipping point for some of these plants to become carnivorous. So they have an opportunity to grow in habitats that are poor in nutrients. So other plants wouldn't be able to grow there. And carnivorous plants have figured out how to supplement their diet by basically bringing those nutrients to them. So as we have a diet, we eat other organisms. Even if you're a vegetarian, you're eating the tissues of complete living organisms. So you're getting plant cells that have proteins and DNA and fats and so on. But plants are basically whatever they can get as nutrient molecules from their environment. So they can be in this kind of habitat, have a really hard time growing if they're only restricted to the nutrients available to them. You might recognize this kind of habitat. This is the habitat that's featured in the movie Up. This is a critter from that movie. Mount Roraima is one of those. There's some fantastic waterfalls in this area. And this kind of habitat, really kind of ethereal, almost an alien landscape here because it's so foggy and sometimes enriched for these strange kinds of plants. Okay, so just one by one, we'll go through those requirements. Again, this is kind of one of those things where people have drawn the line and say, okay, we're going to count this as a carnivorous plant if it satisfies these three requirements. So first requirement is that they attract animals to them. And we'll see a few different strategies for capturing and killing animals. A couple of our examples here on the left, we have what's called a sundew. And this has modified leaves with these also modified hairs with sticky sugar on the ends that trap insects there. And the trap is part of this, but it's also part of the attraction. So an insect looking at this might see the glistening that looks like sweet nectar. It is sort of nectar, but it's a nectar trap. And so that's part of the attraction here, is a nice sort of color appearance and the appearance of some sugar they could potentially mop up and use for nutrients and energy. The pitcher plant here, this is our local native Wisconsin pitcher plant, Sarracenia. And this one has modified leaves into pitchers, and they have pools of water in there. And these are attractive in having places to hide or just water to drink. Or, if insect, I believe a basic insect behavior is finding interesting little crevices to explore. And so this is one where insects will get in there for a variety of reasons. And as we'll see, they'll have trouble getting out. So attracting the animals, a variety of reasons, looking like food, looking like a place to hide are pretty common strategies. The next part about being carnivorous is having the ability to capture insects. So obviously, if you just feed an insect and it moves away, then you're not capturing that insect. And we'll see some modifications here. So the sundew, again, has these sticky pads on its leaves, and the individual hairs stick to the insects and trap them in place, and they get so stuck that they're unable to fly or walk away. The pitcher plants are a pitfall trap where they fall in and they have trouble getting out. There's sort of a lip on the underside of these, this rim around the lip of the pitcher is really prohibitive for anybody crawling out. They'd be in this liquid here and drown eventually and die. This is the snap trap of a bladderwort in the genus Utricularia. We have some of these locally in Wisconsin. And then probably the most famous carnivorous plant, the Venus flytrap. These are modified leaves as well, and they're modified into these traps that can move very quickly after they've been stimulated to trap. So clear modifications in all cases here for keeping an insect in place. Typically insects, some of these larger Nepenthes pitcher plants can trap small mammals, but often we're looking at insects in these. Again, not something you have to watch out for. And then finally, having the modifications to actually take the nutrients from the animals you've killed. So if you've got a dead animal next to you, how does this plant kind of enrich its own nutrient uptake from the animals? So having some kind of digestive enzyme is important. And usually they do studies, I'll show you examples where they can demonstrate that the nutrients from the insect have ended up inside of the plant. So again, another sundew here. And then this is the inside of one of those pitcher plants in the genus Sarracenia. This would be a bee. Hard to see, but it's in water right now with really no hope of getting out of there. Okay, so we'll talk about some of the more familiar, probably, types of carnivorous plants, but I want to lead in with a few of these carnivorous plants that are actually recently discovered. So we have just so many amazing tools these days, and lots of people exploring habitats in ways that they haven't maybe looked for a while. And this is a relatively new discovery of a carnivorous plant called Philcoxia minensis in Brazil. And it fits, I want to just kind of walk through and illustrate how this plant is demonstrated to be carnivorous because it ticks all the boxes of being a carnivorous plant. So even before we talk about the plant, we can talk about the habitat. This is growing in just sand, white sand. You could just look at that and see it's not really rich in nutrients. So this is a habitat where lots of plants would have trouble growing because they can't get a lot of nutrients from the soil. And so this plant comes along and says, I've got a strategy for making my own nutrients. So this is the plant. This is a group of them together. You can see their leaves are kind of in and sometimes even under this sandy habitat. And then this is their common victim. This is a nematode or a roundworm, soil worm. These are very common in habitats worldwide. And this is typically what they are harvesting as their food using modifications that we'll see, and then just a little flower here. So a little more detail about that. The evidence for what we needed to observe in a carnivorous plant was to attract. Maybe, I don't know if I have the best example of this having an attraction, but there's potentially some secretion on the hairs. These are modified hairs on the leaves. And the leaves, as you can see, find themselves underground, under the soil, or at least at the soil level pretty often. So they're in habitat that these soil nematodes would visit, and they make their way around. They might be interested in exploring, or maybe there's some plant sugar around here. I don't remember reading anything about that part of the process. But then more in the illustration here, we've got illustrations of nematodes. So this is under a high-powered microscope showing a nematode basically stuck to the leaf surface. There are these projected portions here. These are glandular projections. The little slits here, these are actually the stomata, the breathing pores on the leaf surface. And then a sand grain here that just happens to be in the image there, but clearly a nematode trapped on the surface. So we've got, I guess, attraction. We can at least demonstrate that there are some nematodes on there. They had to get there somewhere. They were either walking by casually or were directly attracted to the leaves, and they're trapped on the surface. And then this kind of one of the final pieces of the puzzle is really to demonstrate that they have been eaten by the plant. So just being trapped might not be a carnivorous plant, but being trapped and directly eaten. We'll go over here to these other images here. Here we've got a fluorescent image where the fluorescent portions are showing the locations of phosphatase enzymes. So that's an enzyme that's involved in digesting molecules, and it's on those projections on the leaf surface. And then probably the most important here, these are leaves where they have a radioactively labeled nitrogen. So here we have labeled nitrogen that's present in the nematodes. And to demonstrate that the nutrients are getting from the nematode into the plant, you can watch that radioactivity that's not present in the environment. There's a control, no radioactivity. You can watch it get enriched in the plant over time. So 24 hours, 48 hours after consuming these slightly radioactive nematodes, you can see that the special labeled radioactive nitrogen is significantly present in the plant leaves. So we got all three present, tick all the boxes and say, yes, indeed, this is a carnivorous plant, Phyllocoxia. And there have been a few other ones. I just want to gloss over these other ones a little bit more quickly. I'd say there's new exploration for plants that are doing these steps. So deliberately attracting, digesting insects. This is a plant in family called Tophieldiaceae. So from year 2021, this meat-eating plant is only a part-time killer. And you can see maybe also a little bit of the evolution of some of these strategies. So some plants have sticky hairs on their stems as a deterrent. So a crawling insect might be interested in getting up here to get some nectar. And so having sticky hairs on here, that's a pretty commonly used strategy to deter insects from crawling their way up to the nectar. An ant, for example, is not a good pollinator for most flowers. And so having an ant steal your nectar is a waste of nectar. So they put in these sticky defenses. And this is a plant where its natural sticky defenses there may be evolving toward a actually full carnivorous strategy. Here's another one, another plant covered in sticky hairs. And this is called killer tobacco. So sometimes these start off as speculation, and then over time they might get demonstrated as true carnivory in these different plants. Just a really interesting ecology perspective on all of this, right? So the plant needs nutrients. If it figures out, if it evolves its way toward getting more nutrients from the environment at the expense of some animals, then it might get an edge. And then this example, this used to be kind of the classic almost carnivorous plant example. I suspect there are a few other examples like this one. This one's kind of a fascinating example of truly a plant that's almost carnivorous. So it has a lot of appearance similarity to that sundew plant that we'll talk about in more detail. It has sticky hairs. It's attractive to insects. The insects get stuck on there and they die, kind of. The extra part of this is that the plant doesn't have the ability to absorb nutrients directly from these animals. So it may trap and kill an insect by starving it on the surface. but that insect is then just dead on the outside of the plant. And the extra part here, the second bullet point, refers to the fact that these other insects, these bugs here, they are present on the Rorigula plant, and they have modifications where they've evolved to work their way around this stickiness. So they have very smooth, waxy surfaces of their bodies. They can walk in a way where they don't get trapped by the traps, and they kind of swarm these other insects that get trapped. So it's going to go and actually eat this insect. That benefits the bug. And how does it benefit the plant? Well, having these bugs eat the trapped insects means that they're going to poop in the vicinity, and their excrement ends up becoming fertilizer for the Rorigula plant. So it's a little bit removed from a direct carnivory. This one is sometimes described as proto-carnivorous or almost carnivorous, but it's still getting nutrients from these trapped insects. So there's still the feedback that would keep it being sticky and trapping these insects, even though it's not directly eating them. And just kind of highlighting our overall perspective here, we're going to look at a variety of different carnivorous plants. And as we've seen in a lot of cases, there are many independent origins of carnivory, just as we saw many origins of woody plants, trees and shrubs. We saw origins of aquatic plants. You could do this for desert plants and so on. So there's just another instance where there's a clear advantage to becoming carnivorous, and lots of plants have gotten there from different starting points.